I'm with the French Catholic School Board, le Conseil scolaire de District Catholique Centre-Sud. To add a bit, there are 72 school boards in Ontario, of which there are now 12 that are French school boards. There are 8 Catholic and 4 public French language school boards. And I represent the CSD-CCS. Okay, so there. So my board welcomes more than 15,000 students this year. We are one of the few boards that is growing. You may be aware of issues in education right now, but there are many school boards that are not growing, that are living what we call la décroissance, and they have to manage with less. We are very happy to be growing. And it is a sign of the fact that there are Francophone students and families in the region that we serve. And this is a trend that will continue in terms of South Central Ontario. It has clearly been indicated that with population growth and so forth, that we can expect to continue to grow. So we have 44 elementary schools and 10 secondary schools, but we're over a very wide territory. We work all the way through to Niagara, up to the Georgian Bay, with schools all the way to Peterborough. So it gives you an indication as to the different communities that we work in. And our mission is obviously to offer students a quality education in a Francophone Catholic environment. And our board is based in Toronto. The head office is based in Toronto. Now, we have, over the course, and I will go into the numbers later, but there's some numbers that have been indicated, but we're faced with a number of situations where, as a board, we recognized that we had to start looking at immigration and welcoming issues in our schools, and to be very proactive about it, to the extent that our board adopted a strategic plan, 2011-16, and the objective of having successful implementation program, welcoming and integration activities are a measurable requirement in terms of our activities. So that I'm sorry, I am thinking in French as I go along, so I have to I will get better. The fact that it is part of a strategic plan and presented to a school board makes this a very serious initiative for us. We are the only French language school board that has taken the step to include this in its strategic plan, and has sent, in that sense, I have to put forward a plan with a team and resources, limited resources, as to how we're going to go about that. So I'm going to talk to you right now as to the model that we developed and some of the strategies that we are looking at. Our integration model includes inputs and outputs, inputs that come both within and outside the board, because it was very clear to us that we can't do this, be successful at welcoming and integration strategies alone. And there were already many resources available in the community, and there was already a track record of some services that have been available, and that we decided that we would build upon. So in the top bubble there, we talk about programs that we administer ourselves. So we are administrating a program called PANA, another ALF. We have community liaison, and we have settlement workers in schools. I will get into detail. The other area, which is the looking at the school and its community, there we need to focus on parent involvement in school council, in volunteering activities, in school governance, and in bringing community associations to be supportive of the school environment. The programs that are administered externally, we have our partnerships, community organizations, provincial agencies, federal agencies, and so forth. And we have a long list of partners that we deal with. And then, of course, all the external data that we look at and we take into consideration are the demographic tendencies, clusters, certain the vague, certain waves of immigration, and what the community is asking us to do and to set up. So these are all mechanisms that we've had to put in place within our board to try to track the process of our program. PANA is a program financed by the Ministry of Education, and in schools where you have a sufficient number, and it could be 1 student or it could be 20 students, okay? There are teachers that are specifically assigned for the program d'appui aux nouveaux arrivants. In a school where you would have a few students who have recently arrived, the teacher may be only half-time assigned to this particular program. And in other schools where you have larger groups, they may be assigned full-time, and you may have several teachers in that team. These teachers work very closely, first of all, at identifying academic needs, very much working in terms of how do you catch up. Some students and families are not necessarily what we call à niveau. So they have various academic initiatives to facilitate not only the social cultural but the academic integration of the child so that he or she will succeed at the grade level that they are, in the age group that they are. There is another program called Actualisation linguistique de français. We have a program that surprisingly, it meets the needs of some immigrants. We know that we meet the needs of some Francophones who come from here, who may not be sufficiently conversant or their child sufficiently conversant. But some immigrants obviously have had to take a detour before arriving to Canada. And they may come from Francophone-based countries, as we talked about, let's say Lebanon, or we talk about countries in Africa, okay, where they were very fluent in French, but may have had to take a detour in another country prior to arriving to Canada and had a child. And that child does not speak French now that they arrive in Canada. But that family has been eligible within our schools. So we need to work with that child to if they choose to come within our schools, how does that child appropriate the sufficient language skills to catch up on the language that they have lost because of that le voyage, the detour, or the time it took for the family to finally come and settle in Canada. The last initiative is one of community liaison. We have invested in a team of liaison officers that work very, very closely at identifying organizations, partners, community organizations, not-for-profit groups, activities, and so forth, so that we may identify clusters of communities, hear emerging needs, and start to work on projects together. So we have in areas, so in Toronto-Durham, there's Adolphine Mukamazi, you may know her. In Peel-Halton, we have Marie-Pierre Daou. In Hamilton, Niagara, we have Franklin Lucam. And in York-Simcoe, this is a new position we just opened, we have Nadia Martin. Because in York, we have, and Simcoe, we are seeing the trend moving northern and in the arrival of new families. We also, in part of this project, have come through with another envelope that was recently developed. It's now 2 years old, with the Ministry of Education, called Pivot. And when the ministry approached us with this, they had a specific idea in mind of providing funding to schools where they have a high concentration of new families, new students, and trying to support the school in creating opportunities of bringing the parents to that school. So engaging the rapport between the school and the families. We know the challenge that there is between new immigrants who not necessarily understand the relationship that they must have here in the Ontario system of education. We base it on having a rapport and engagement of parents. Newcomers may feel intimidated by this, or they may not have had that experience of dealing with school systems where they come from. And this particular project allowed us to create opportunities of encouraging this kind of involvement between families, associations, and schools. So we had information sessions on post-secondary education. We developed physical activity programs. We developed summer camps where there were awards ceremonies where parents would come. We had visits and orientation operations throughout the cities or their communities. These are all formulas that we know that exist in other programs, but certainly it allowed us to focus on some community groups or some communities. Now, we have Swiss workers in schools, and we have two models in our board. One of the model is in partnership with community organizations, and the other model is as a direct administrator. So as a direct administrator, we would have sub-partnerships, as I would say, with organizations to support the needs once we've identified them with parents. The Swiss program in Peel-Halton is a program that we administer ourselves. CIC has the contract with our board. And that's a model that they use with other school boards in Peel-Halton in that region. Other boards have, if I think of the Peel District School Board and the others, they certainly have welcoming centers. They have they have Swiss workers that are hired by the board, thankfully to the grant or the partnership with CIC. So we have 2 employees who work there. And we've been quite successful in that particular area of growth because we have seen exponential growth in our schools in the Mississauga, Oakville, Brampton area, Milton, very, 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 very active. In terms of Toronto, Durham, Hamilton, Niagara, we have agreements with Centre Francophone de Toronto, Conseil des organismes francophones of Durham, and the Centre de santé communautaire Hamilton-Niagara, who administer their Swiss programs in partnership with us in terms of needs identified. So that is the model. When I talked about the need for partnerships, it's very much in relationship with the community organizations. And our liaison officers have been very good at extending that rapport and tending the hand and finding out at what stage that community organization is. Because we know many of them have an employee who is a newcomer and is trying to put together financing and creating jobs and creating their own infrastructure. And we believe that's a very interesting investment from our point of view, is to see how can we find projects where we may finance something or find another source of financing. Where is this organization identifying the need and the service that they want to provide, and what kind of model do they have to grow? So we have taken some organizations like La Passerelle RD, we've worked with Boréal, Canafrique, CFORD, Sophie Franc in the Welland region, and we have identified key projects and worked them through the school, put some money sometimes on the table, found other situations where we have made this work. So it has had a consequence of employment opportunities as well for these organizations. Now, there's some things that we're starting to see and what we can talk about. Now, you're going to talk probably about some of the slowing and the caps that Francophone immigration is kind of meeting at this point. There's a slowing down. But we have seen new waves of immigration very recently. And so what has happened in Egypt has very much surprised us. And in August, our schools, particularly in the northern Markham, York region, and Peel, and some in central Toronto, were telling us that they had newcomers, they were new families coming in, and they were arriving from Egypt, and they were Copts. They Copt they were fleeing and they were arriving. And so we had to adjust very quickly, and what we focused on was very much training, finding support from the community, any infrastructure that we had of Egyptian-based teachers, Egyptian-based principals, we have some, and delegated them as support to welcoming these families. So when we talk about you know, we see the statistics and we say, oh, okay, at the federal level, they're saying everything's going to even off and slow down a little bit. Well, you know, we saw firsthand that an international event definitely has an impact very soon after. And so we have to remain vigilant. We just can't sit on the numbers and say, oh, the entries will slow down because of policies. There are things that can happen in the world, and we need to be reactive and supportive of that. The other is the whole area of labor and employment issues. That is the first thing that parents are telling us that they need help with. Definitely, they need to find a job. They need to find a way to start up their business. This is the fundamental issue that, you know, we find around housing as well, and health issues. And obviously, our job is to teach them as to how they can show them and accompany them in how they can support their child in the school system. But we have found that what they're telling us is, we can do that, but we can only do that if you help me find somebody who will find me a job. So we have to be open to finding those partners and in handing over and creating those partnerships, which we have done in the Peel-Halton model. And we have brought in a partner which will come in through parents that we have identified, and we will help them move on into hopefully having those supports. The other area is youth activity. Teenagers have nothing. They have nothing out there where we can direct them to. They're in the French language. A lot of these teenagers are coming and they don't speak English, so they will not go to the Y. And there are fantastic programs out there, but there's a real lack of solid French after-school, weekend, summer activities for these kids, and they're ending up on the street doing nothing. And they return, and the principals are telling us, look, this has a very big impact on how, you know, their capacity to finish high school. All right, they are adopting, obviously, there are issues around there. And we, therefore, when I went earlier about summer programs and talked about finding the models for that, we certainly are very, very sensitive to this. We have seen immigrant concentrations in some schools, and the impact that that has on the transition to secondary school. Being a board with such a large territory, okay, we would have a high school that will serve schools with from large distances away. It's a very large zone. I told you 10 high schools over the zone that I told you from Niagara Falls away. So imagine the zone within there that schools are feeding into that high school. Well, what happens is you may have an elementary school with a large concentration of a particular background and so forth. Once they transition into the high school, that other community is not ready. It's not ready to be welcoming. It has not had that experience. And so we find ourselves with some really interesting challenges in high schools where we have worked extensively with the families years ago, but once they join into a larger community, there are challenges. Which brings me to the issue of timeline for support, and particularly for the CIC definition of immigrant services. We know that in the funding for Swiss program, it is 5 years. You have an immigrant in the last 5 years. Well, in what I just told you about, that support has to continue for a long time. Okay, and 5 years has not been sufficient for us. So thankfully, we have had other envelopes and other ways of finding resources as a board. And we find ways to accommodate. But this is definitely something that and my board is putting on the table. When they are asking us for the numbers and the stats, and we indicate what is the source of, the numbers of the families and the students that we're serving, we do not consider that to be sufficiently representative of, because there are many more that cannot be counted in those numbers due to the programs at CIC. So those are some of the ideas I'm putting on the table right now. And that's it. Okay. So to finish, our goal is to foster a welcoming environment, particular school integration at all grade levels. In order to do that, we need partners in building an inclusive strategy. And the student's success is entirely related to the degree within which the entire family has been integrated. I've given the example of economic stressors and so forth. So those are some of the things I'd like to say. So thank you very much. Okay.